What's up, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Chris Welsh. That is Pat Fitzmaurice. We got Scott Pianowski in the house for Week 11 ranks. If you guys want more ranks, just go to fantasypros.com/rankings. You can peruse all the positions. You don't need a positional episode. I mean, you do because you want to hang out with us. But then you can go and just check out quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, IDP. There's Dynasty. There's all the great stuff. But when you go and you want to check out the weekly ranks, watch it because they are going to adjust as the 150, 160, close to 200 experts out there are dropping their ranks in throughout the week. So that bad boy is going to keep adjusting. And that is what we are going to be talking about today on the wide receiver rank show. That's what we have got. We got some big questions, some big changes, a quarterback change that happened pre-show that probably is going to affect some wide receivers. Gentlemen, are you ready to check out the big board? Some yeses? Yes. Ooh, heads are shaking. Yes. We're bobbling it. Let's bobblehead over. Top 12 wide receivers. The big board starts with Jamar Chase at 1. We've got A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins. That's our top 5. Cooper Kupp, George Pickens, Puka Nacua, Tyreek Hill, Debo, Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson. Deep breath, everybody. Let's talk about Tyreek Hill. This is going to be an interesting one because I have been an annoyingly pro Tyreek Hill person for the year, just thinking he's just too talented and like they're going to figure it out. And then Tua's going to get back. Guys, I look at him at 9 and I don't think I can do it. I think this is why, by the way, he's going to go off. I told Fitz this before we started this up. I said, don't worry. He's going to go off this week because I think this is going to be my out week on Tyreek Hill. The wrist injury worries me. The first read percentage on A-Chan, I think it was the highest of all offensive players. And then you go to Waddle, who owned that first half and then just disappeared. I just don't think the volume is there. There's something weird and lacking with this offense. So I personally think I am out on Tyreek Hill, but both of you fine gentlemen, you guys are both higher than the consensus. Again, 9.5 PPR on the Fantasy Pros ranks. Scott, you got him at 7, and Fitz, you got him at 4, baby. So Fitz, let's kick it to you. I'm out. So you're going to get like number 1 overall rank this coming week because you're going to have Tyreek high. 4, you are in. Is there no concern about how the offense is running and or that wrist?
There are a number of concerns. Yeah, Tyreek says he is playing with a torn ligament in his wrist, and we've got this weird epidemic of wrist injuries among wide receivers this year. Buffalo with Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman. Devontae Adams is dealing with a wrist thing now, and Tyreek looked okay, though, to me on Monday. Like, he still looks fast. It doesn't seem like he's having any trouble catching the ball. In the 3 games since Tua has come back from his concussion, Tyreek's numbers have been unexciting but decent. 6 for 72, no touchdowns. 4 for 80, no touchdowns. Then Monday night, we got 3 for 16 yards, but he did have a touchdown, and he ran a couple of reverses for 11 yards. Maybe the wrist injury like ratchets up the risk for Tyreek. Possible he lands on it wrong and doesn't finish the game. But man, he still looks fast and dangerous to me. I know Tua hasn't been taking as many deep shots as he usually does. Maybe that's part of the Tua protection plan to keep him from taking big hits, get rid of the ball faster. But I am just going to keep stubbornly ranking Tyreek like the superstar he has been in recent years, and I feel like the big game is coming.
Yeah, I mean, I totally feel that, and I just, like I said, just been stupidly continuously saying that. But, one of the things that seemed a little bit more prevalent in this game is when they did stretch the ball, it was kind of a 49er way. They want to stretch the ball in the middle of the field, and that's the Jalen Waddle spot. That's either short Jonnu or deeper Jalen Waddle. Those end arounds, it was Malik Washington this week. It's like all the things that you could like. They don't seem to want to stretch the ball deep on the sidelines. They're not doing the screen passes to Tyreek Hill a bunch. We're not seeing end arounds. It just seems like the usage is going down, and the offensive play calling, to me, has really been abysmal with the Dolphins. Scott, what say you, though? You are higher than consensus. You're a little bit lower than where Pat is, but Pat's got him at top 5. So where are you at on Tyreek Hill then?
Yeah, in my fresh Glengarry Ross leads, I have Tyreek at wide receiver 9. Unfortunately, if you roster Tyreek, you don't have a choice. You have to play him. But I mean, since Tua came back, half-point PPR, Tyreek Hill's been wide receiver 41, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 23. He's only been inside the top 20 in the first game of the year when he went crazy against Jacksonville, a game that it seems like it was a million years ago, 130 yards and a touchdown. they can't run the offense they want because Tyreek's not healthy. Tua is somebody they're trying to overprotect. It's a game they should probably control against Vegas. So I think Tua is probably throwing 25 passes or fewer. I guarantee you this. This sounds like an ultimate cop-out, but I'm not even going to consider Tyreek Hill in DFS. I wouldn't trade for him at anything close to a full market value. And, I have him at wide receiver 9. I'm not thrilled about that. It speaks to there's a lot of teams on bye. There's a lot of receivers, as Pat mentioned, who are hurt this year and hurt right now. And then there's just offenses that have gone into a ditch because quarterbacks are, they're not playing the right guy or whatever it is. So it's a really ugly time in the wide receiver and passing game streets. But I am not. I actually think I'm going to bet under on a Tyreek prop this week, and that's something I'd normally be petrified to do.
Yeah, am I advocating to bench him? Probably not, but I do think it's now open. I will not have him as a top 12 wide receiver this week. I might bet in under. So I am offering myself to all of you listening as tribute that I will take on all of the negativity of Tyreek Hill, which means he is bound to blow up. So I offer myself as tribute for all of you Tyreek owners so you guys can have your big week. But it's done. I think I'm done, especially with a lot of what we saw this past week. And we're not 1 week out of Tua. It's not like Tua just came back. Tua's been back for a couple of weeks. This offense doesn't look right. The play calling is weird. And, I don't know if Tua throws 20 times in that game. And by how the usage has been, Tyreek's probably only getting 4 or 5. So I'm out on him being a wide receiver 1, but there are some big questions. And, at the end of the show, we always tell you some other ways you can start putting Tyreek Hill up against some other players for you guys as far as where did the debate start? But that still is an ECR top 12 wide receiver. We have got wide receiver 2s coming up, but I want to tell you about my friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the #1 app if you are looking for live events. They've got Game Time Picks, which is a curation of multiple sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Their Game Time Picks makes it easier to save across the board. They've got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. It's my literal favorite thing. You don't have to play the guessing game of what your ticket's going to cost when it's all done. The price you see, it's all in. You can get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, which is amazing. And the lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage as well. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code FANTASYPROS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code FANTASYPROS for $20 off. Download Game Time today because what time is it? It's game time. Wide receiver 2s, 13 through 24. We're going to Devontae Adams at 13, followed by DK Metcalf, Drake London, Zay Flowers. CeeDee Lamb has fallen all the way down to 17 with that quarterback position. Jaden Reed at 18, Josh Downs at 19, DeAndre Hopkins, Ridley Sutton, Tillman, and Darnell Mooney. Gentlemen, let's talk about Josh Downs. He's the new addition, as we mentioned in a previous show. Right before we started up our recordings, we found out the news that Anthony Richardson is now back as quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe it doesn't put as big of a question into his effect on Jonathan Taylor. Maybe him as a starting quarterback really still isn't put into question because he doesn't break the top 12. But boy, does it bring a big question to Josh Downs, because Josh Downs, whenever Anthony Richardson has been out there, has just been down into the 30s. Joe Flacco loves Downs, even though he's kind of been struggling. Pittman is injured. What do we do with Josh Downs? Scott, let's start with you. Anthony Richardson is in. Josh Downs, pre-Richardson, was a top 20 wide receiver. What does he look like now with Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I just played this game where Josh Downs or with a bunch of guys, and it was the other guy, right? Give me Tank Dell, give me JSN, give me Jauan Jennings, who looks really good in that X role, the Brandon Ayuk role for the Niners. I don't trust. And look, we have to accept that the Jets defense is not what we were promised, right? Man, did they just get embarrassed at Arizona where every other play was a first down? I'm shocked at what a no-show that was by their defense, and their offense isn't covering themselves in glory either. But I need to see it from Richardson. Now, the one thing you can hang your hat on with Richardson is that if you have to play any of their receivers, whether it's Downs or some of the lesser guys, Alec Pierce or Mitchell or whatever, it sounds like Pittman probably won't play. Richardson can make your day with one play, right? He's going to chuck a few deep. We know he's probably going to complete 50% or fewer of his passes, but there'll be a couple of highlight plays. There always are. So you just hope, if you're a Downs manager, you hope it's a 50-yard touchdown to Downs. That's not the way I want to make my living. Is, hopefully I'll hit a grand slam in the 9th inning. I want to have a more steady mileage. I want to have a more steady OBP, whatever it is. I want to have a more steady consistency rate. I don't know what the metaphor is I'm searching here for, but that's what Anthony Richardson does to me. That's what Shane Steichen does to me. So I have moved Josh Downs down, as we speak, down to my wide receiver 30.
Yeah, the big plays, unfortunately, with the Colts end up being Alec Pierce. He's the guy that gets the 60-yarder. Josh Downs has lived off of really great volume, and you just don't assume that's there. Those names that Scott was throwing out, like Tank Dell is 30 on Fantasy Pros ECR consensus wide receiver. So, Pat, Josh Downs, no longer a top 20. Where do you think his resting spot is going to be as far as overall ranks or / like where you want to put him?
Right around where Scott has him, wide receiver 30, and I had him inside the top 20 with Joe Flacco. But I would add to Scott's comment about Anthony Richardson being able to make your day with like 1 or 2 plays if your name is Alec Pierce. That's the caveat I would add to that. I dropped Pierce 2 spots in the rankings with the quarterback change, and I dropped Downs like 11 spots. So I think it hurts Josh Downs far more than it hurts Alec Pierce. I mean, Alec Pierce is a desperation flex play at best anyway. But Downs needs that volume, and Joe Flacco was peppering him with targets. And now I don't think we can count on that. I think passing volume is always going to be less with Anthony Richardson than it would be with Joe Flacco. So just not that much interest in Downs. And this is with Michael Pittman out. When Michael Pittman comes back, and if he were to come back this week, I would probably have Downs closer to wide receiver 40 than wide receiver 30. So, this just squelches all excitement for Josh Downs.
And the only thing you could hold your hat on would be that, in this time where he's been benched, they've maybe been trying to reform how they want him to attack the offense. And kind of like what we mentioned when we talk about Caleb Williams, it's like with the new offensive coordinator in there, what would be great is if they adjust to him to making shorter, quicker decisions instead of running around and just go to your first or second read, try to get to the first read, make that choice. Same thing would be with Richardson if they readjusted that, but you don't have any trust that they would. They're a disaster right now. And I think a funny thing about this is, Scott, you mentioned Jauan Jennings. I think Jauan Jennings unanimously across the board, if someone came into a live chat and said, hey, who would you start this week, Jennings or Downs? I think we would all slam Jennings at this point. And I think they're a tier difference. I think those guys have now moved in. So I think maybe Downs was the top of a tier and Jennings was at the bottom of it. Downs is now kicked out of that tier. And Jennings is a no-brain start, especially moving into that X role over Josh Downs. Trying to get into Jauan Jennings there a little bit. A couple other, actually, we had Jauan Jennings. We're going to talk about in just a tiny bit in the next range. Zay Flowers, ECR 16. This is one that we just have a big difference on. Pianowski, you've got him at 16 as well. Fitz, you've got him down at 22 going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Interesting because, Terry McLaurin did really light them up. The matchups can be a little bit difficult sometimes on the Steelers, but Terry McLaurin really lit them up. What's got you putting Zay Flowers almost out of wide receiver 2 range, Pat?
Yeah, it's not really the matchup or the possibility of a Joey Porter Jr. shadow. It's more about my concerns with Zay Flowers' target volume going forward. And he had been getting pretty ample target volume in the early part of the season. So he's gone over 100 yards in 4 of his last 6 games. And Zay Flowers saw 9 or more targets in 4 of the Ravens' first 6 games this season. That's pretty good, but the target volume over Baltimore's last 4 games has fallen off. His target counts in those 4 games, 1, 12, 6, and 6. And the 12 came in the game before the Deontay Johnson trade. Now, Deontay hasn't played much of a role. He's had 22 snaps played in Baltimore's first 2 games, but John Harbaugh said they are going to ramp up his usage going forward. So he's going to be used more. And, oh, by the way, Deontay Johnson revenge game against the Steelers this week. And Mark Andrews seems like he's being back to being Mark Andrews. Season high 7 targets against the Bengals last week. So I have nothing bad to say about Zay Flowers. I just think there could be kind of a target squeeze on him the rest of the way.
Yeah, and Scott, it's not to say that you're like super optimistic or anything. You have him at ECR. Is there anything you want to add into maybe some of the pessimism that's kind of thrown out there as far as what that offense is looking like and where Pat has Zay Flowers ranked?
Yeah, two things I'll say pro Flowers. One, as Pat said, the 400-yard games out of 6, and he would have had a big game, I believe, against Tampa had he not gotten hurt early in that game. And I think they just backed off Flowers. So I throw that game completely out. To me, it's like 400-yard games in 5. Now, I realize he doesn't get in on the pinball game. The Bengals and Ravens played a glorious fantasy game last Thursday, and Flowers had very little involvement. But I think the Ravens took Deontay Johnson because the price was so cheap. I don't think he necessarily filled a glaring need for them. They already had decent receiver depth. They thought, okay, if they're going to give Deontay Johnson away, we'll take him. We'll find something for him to do. But I don't think he's a threat at all to the routes that Flowers wins on. I mean, the guy moves like a slinky. He's his lateral agility and ability to change direction on a dime. It just, I mean, my ankles break when I watch the guy on film or just on regular TV. So you have to accept that Flowers is never going to be a huge target guy. He doesn't have 10 targets in any game this year. This is how the Ravens operate. But he's going to make 2 or 3 chunk plays in this game. I know the Steelers, you fear their defense, quote unquote, but I think at the end of the day, Flowers is going to have 4 for 85, and I'd give him maybe a 20 or 30% chance at a touchdown. He's somebody I'm going to confidently play. And Deontay Johnson, another guy I think you could actually drop.
I think you could easily drop him. A move that you would have wanted
even
to
without
make.
a corresponding ad, by the way. You just drop him. Revenge game against the Steelers. You could have a revenge drop against Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, you could just spite. I like spite drops. I'm down for just a spite drop. Like, oh, what did you make? Nothing. I just wanted to drop him just to make a point. That's all that I was doing. Cedric Tillman was a popular pickup a couple weeks ago. Then goes on a bye. Everybody, getting that excitement build up. So where does that lead us to this week? ECR 23, Fitz at 24. Scott, you are the high man at 22. So actually, let's kick it to you on your optimism, or what are you thinking we're getting out of Cedric Tillman? Because wide receiver 2 territory is a big statement. Also pointing out, here are some players that, he is currently being ranked above: Devonta Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tank Dell, Khalil Shakir. I mean, this is a pretty big group. He is firmly sitting in this wide receiver 2 range. So let's get your take on starting him this week.
Yeah, Cedric Tillman, more like Cedric the Entertainer. The last 3 weeks, he's played half-point PPR. He's wide receiver 12, wide receiver 3, and wide receiver 14. And the 2 games, the 12 and the 3, were with Jameis Winston. Of course, Jameis Winston's revenge game against the Saints. If he has any, I don't know if he has any bad feelings there. Jameis Winston is just fun, right? He's going to throw some to his guys. He's going to throw some to the other guys. He's going to look to throw downfield. And the target shares have been there too, 12, 9, and 11 targets. So Tillman's the number 1 receiver. Cooper obviously was traded about a month ago. So against a New Orleans defense, maybe you think that it's easier to run on them, but they traded Lattimore. They're allowing chunk plays. They didn't offer much resistance last week to a bad opponent. So I think Cedric Tillman. Now the schedule is going to get nasty forward: Pittsburgh, Denver, another Pittsburgh game, Kansas City. Although Baltimore is lying in week 18, I guess it doesn't work for fantasy purposes. But I don't love Tillman's schedule going forward, but I'm expecting what he's done, a very consistent return the last 3 weeks. I think he's going to be right in line with that. Something like 7 for 90 and a touchdown sounds about right.
Yeah, a positive is they're just going to probably be playing from behind every single game. One of the weird, Winston's made a bunch of those wide receivers just target hawks now. There's 3 guys, Eli Moore starting to get targets, and Jerry Jeudy's getting back into it. Tillman is the most talented player, and he stacked a couple weeks in there, Fitz. So do you have any added stuff for Cedric Tillman for this week?
The only thing I'll add, Scott was pretty much spot on about the assessment. I like him. I like this is really his last good matchup before things get a little scary with the matchups. The only cold water I have to throw on Cedric Tillman is that in Jameis Winston's first 2 starts for the Browns, he has thrown 41 and 46 passes. He has been throwing it all over the yard. And it's not just Tillman who's getting a lot of targets. It's the target counts for Browns wide receivers over Jameis Winston's 2 starts: 21 Elijah Moore, 20 Cedric Tillman, 19 Jerry Jeudy. And by the way, they have a really good tight end with David Njoku. So I worry that he does not have 9 or 10 targets in his back pocket. I worry that there's a possibility that if the game script goes haywire, it could be 5 or 6. So that's really my only concern, that maybe the target volume doesn't look as good as it has in these last 2 games for Cedric Tillman.
Wide receivers coming up, but first, Need a break from the crowded stores and endless gift lists? Restore your zen and embrace the natural power of cannabis this season with Via. This holiday season, unwind and recharge with Via. Whether you're enjoying a quiet evening at home or embracing the festive cheer, Via's premium THC and THC-free gummies will help you find your perfect holiday balance. Via is well renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies and vapes, THCA flower, soothing topicals, and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. And the best part, Via legally ships to nearly all states in the U.S. in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee. No medical card required. This holiday season, gift yourself some peace of mind. If you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use the code FantasyPros to receive 15% off. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. It's Fantasy Pros. Please support our show and tell them we sent you this holiday season. Enhance your everyday with Via, promo code Fantasy Pros. Wide receiver 3-time, it's wide receiver 25 through 36. Devontae Smith comes in at 25, Jauan Jennings at 26. We got Khalil Shakir, Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Tank Dell. That is our into the 30 range. Jacoby Myers, Jameson Williams, Brian Thomas Jr., Jalen Waddle, Amari Cooper, and Jerry Jeudy at 36. I talked a little bit about Jauan Jennings. Let's kick it over, Fitz. You got Jauan Jennings at 26. Scott, you're a little bit lower on him. I will probably be the high guy. Love seeing him in that X spot, and Purdy absolutely loves him. Fitz, what do you got on Jauan Jennings? We affirmed that Jennings over Downs is kind of a no-brainer. What about Jennings versus Tillman? How close? I think those are like a legit question someone might have. Like, hey, I need a wide receiver 3. I have both Tillman and Jauan Jennings. Are you going to side on Tillman by a large margin, or Jauan Jennings? Is he in play here?
I've still got Tillman 2 spots ahead of Jennings, but we are all realizing what a good player Jauan Jennings is this season. And now the 49ers are basically asking him to play the role that Brandon Ayuk had played as the primary downfield receiver in that offense. And he's delivering the same sort of efficiency that we saw Brandon Ayuk deliver last year. 68.1% catch rate for Jauan Jennings so far this season, 10.4 yards per target. Really good. And now he's playing a lot. 91% snap share last week, 11 targets, 7 catches, 93 yards. I think he's pretty close to a must start against the Seahawks.
Scott, you've got him at wide receiver 30. So it's like a fringy wide receiver 3 here. What is keeping him from being a wide receiver 2 this week?
Yeah, just the messiness of my early week ranks, because when I was doing my Josh Downs adjustment, I realized I had Jauan Jennings way too low. He had that blow up game earlier this year, 175 yards, I think the 3 touchdowns. And Bill James, the baseball stat guy, talked about something called signature significance. So like if a baseball pitcher threw a 15 strikeout game, it's probably impossible for that player not to be a special pitcher, even though generally we want large samples. But when a small sample has such an amplitude, it usually means that there could be something behind it. We don't need to get the big sample. And I felt that game, that 175-3 game for Jennings, meant signature significance. I think he had like 91 yards the next game, then he got hurt. But he looked terrific last week to me. He can make plays after the catch. He can threaten all strata of the field. The fact that they've thrown him into the Ayuk role immediately speaks to how comfortable they are with him. And he's been there for a while. They paid him too. I know a lot of it was because of his blocking and everything, but he's been around the league. He's been with the team. He's been in the meetings and all that stuff. And Purdy trusts him. Shanahan trusts him. I think he's a locked-in wide receiver too. I just didn't have him ranked highly enough. I do slightly prefer Tillman because I think Tillman's maybe more important to his offense than Jennings is to his. But I earlier we were talking about all these teams. Quarterbacks are hurt, quarterbacks are benched. Teams are shipwrecked. We don't trust this team, that team. We trust the San Francisco 49ers, man. And so when you can set your lineup and you're investing in an X receiver and every snap basically and every pass route receiver basically tied to Kyle Shanahan and tied to Brock Purdy, sure, tied to the San Francisco 49ers, I'm in. I think Jennings has 8 to 10 targets in his foreseeable future every week.
Scott does.
Now,
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if Marquez Valdes-Scantling meets the threshold for signature significance.
MVS, man.
Get out of
I
here,
joke
Pat.
that every receiver has some boomer bust in his game, but the thing with MVS is he will give you 13 busts, and you just don't know. He's the human roulette wheel, right? The number's going to come up at some point, but you might be there all night, like in Lost in America, where Albert Brooks' wife is betting the same roulette number every time. I mean that's what MVS is. His odds of hitting are probably the same as hitting one roulette number. So he's hit it. I wasn't proud. I picked him up in a couple of leagues. I didn't make proactive bids. I actually didn't really want to win them. And now I have MVS. I really don't want to start him. But the Saints are just, they played 2 awesome games. And since then, all they've done other than Kamara is break our heart. Nobody can time Taysom Hill properly. And Chris Olave can't stay healthy, which is awful. There was a breakout season for their other receiver who got hurt. I can't believe that 2-0 start feels like it was 1977.
It's very shameful talking about MVS. We're not going to do it. We're actually, what I wanted to ask was
wide receiver 53 for me. I'll just give it out to you,
Yeah,
Pat. Where do you have MVS?
Don't
I
start.
think I'm a little lower than that. No, maybe right around there.
Even lower than that.
I might even be a little bit higher. But what I want to ask is, you only got MVS if A, Ricky Pearsall was not available, or B, you didn't bid enough. And Ricky Pearsall was at the tippy top of the waivers. And since we were talking about Jauan Jennings, I want to throw this out on where you guys are as far as startability. ECR 40 puts him as like a mid-tier flex this week. Pat, let's go to you real quick. Jauan Jennings, you're in on. Are you in on Pearsall as a flex starter? What's your rank range?
I've got him wide receiver 45. I'd rather not play him if I didn't have to. It's just that, I don't think there's a safe target floor with him, and probably a max of like 6 or 7 targets. He only played about 64% of the offensive snaps last week. And the 49ers just don't use a third wideout as much as some other teams because they like to play Kyle Juszczyk a lot.
The only interesting thing about that I'm going to push back against is his snap percentage might be lower, but the target percentage of his snaps is higher. And it's very similar to what they do with Jauan Jennings. When Jauan Jennings wouldn't play the 3 downs, or he wouldn't be the full down guy, he'd be the third wide receiver to come in, and then they would get him the ball. The usage of Pearsall, because of his speed, makes him interesting, but I think the key is he's not really trustworthy. Scott, you've got him a little bit higher. I think you've got him more mid flex range. Are you okay with putting him out here this week? What's the rank?
Yeah, I don't feel bad about it. The only problem is that McCaffrey's ahead of him, Kittle's ahead of him, Debo's ahead of him. We just sang a folk song and wrote a sonnet for Jauan Jennings, who's ahead of him. So even Purdy will run for maybe 20 yards in a given week. So I think they like Pearsall, and the fact that he's doing anything after the way his rookie season started, the unfortunate news in the summer. I mean, it's just nice to see him producing. His touchdown was suitable for framing, but just a lot of people, a lot of established made men in front of him on the San Francisco offense. So I think he's more of you could flex him. I don't think he's somebody you have to play, but at least if you do play him, you're betting on a good infrastructure.
Yeah. And all of the target conversation, he did do it this last week. So something to keep an eye on going up against the Seahawks. The final one, I'm actually going to turn into a little debate between these guys. We had Jameson Williams, really polarizing, kind of questionable player, ECR 32. Fitz, you've got him at 30. Pianowski, you got him at 34. So, his ECR is the sandwich between your guys' ranks. But it's funny because this was a guy that was inside the top 20 for a period of time. Another guy that hit inside the top 20 was Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas we all felt very comfortable about. Now Mac Jones is the quarterback, and we don't. This week in the ECR, as we are recording this, Jameson Williams is higher than Brian Thomas right now. That's a level of where we've gone. So, Scott, this is a Jameson Williams question, but Jameson Williams versus Brian Thomas. Who is the winner of this? Who are you starting? And what is the rank discrepancy for you?
I have them next to each other, but I have to play Jameson Williams. And a month ago, I would have said, well, Jameson Williams, you're betting on a big play on low volume. Brian Thomas, he's probably a better player right now. Heavier volume. What happened to that volume? The last 4 games, Brian Thomas has 3, 4, 4, and 5 targets. That's a fireable offense right there. He's the best player on this Jacksonville offense. Everybody sees it, except for the people who need to see it, the quarterback and the coach. And Detroit, the NFC favorite right now, probably the second Super Bowl favorite after the Chiefs. I don't know how much longer the Chiefs are going to make up these ways to win games, but they keep doing it. But don't miss how good the Detroit defense is playing, right? It kept them in that game. They should have been blown out in the first half when Goff was just throwing picks every other snap. Defense kept them in the game, forced a lot of field goals. Their secondary is playing really well. The pass rush, they have to blitz more with Hutchinson out. I know eventually Darius White will step in, but their secondary has been unbelievable. I think they're actually going to do a decent job with Thomas here. So Jameson Williams, you're only getting 4 or 5 targets. You just hope it's at least they scheme up a lot of splashy plays for him. And it's an offense, Ben Johnson is going to be a head coach next year. He knows how to use Jameson Williams. It's a little bit frustrating that Jameson Williams has turned into a one-man bingo card with some of his off-the-field problems, but I just don't trust the Jaguars. You would think game script, right? He's going to see 8 to 10 targets. He has to. They're going to get blown out here, but I don't trust Mac Jones. I think Detroit's secondary is playing awfully well. I think this is going to be a blowout where maybe the Jaguars score 1 touchdown. For the first time all season, I don't want to start Brian Thomas Jr.
Tell you what, with Jameson Williams' only gambling issue was bingo. Fitz, what do you think about Brian Thomas Jr. versus Jameson Williams? Is there a rank difference? ECR says they are next to each other, but in favor of Jameson.
I've got Jameson like 7 spots higher. And I totally agree with Scott. Give me the guy in the Arnold Schwarzenegger offense versus the guy in the Pee Wee Herman offense. And again, targets are not really that big a difference. Like neither guy is getting the amount of targets you want to see. And we know that the Lions will just squeeze the life out of opponents with the running game if they can. And they probably can this week as 13.5-point home favorites against the Jags. So Jared Goff has thrown 25 or fewer passes in 6 of Detroit's 9 games this season, under 20 passes twice. So this could be a game where maybe Goff only throws like 16 or 17 passes, but look, we could see 2 or 3 huge plays for Jameson Williams, long gains, touchdowns, or we could basically see the Lions run the wishbone and he gets like 1 catch for 11 yards. So it's not without risk, but man, there's just nothing to like about this Jaguars offense right now.
You mentioned Pee Wee Herman. I didn't watch the Pee Wee Herman show, but I am old enough to remember when Irving Fryer would celebrate touchdowns with a Pee Wee Herman celebration. Somebody had to tell me it was a Pee Wee Herman celebration because I really didn't know much about Pee Wee Herman. But Irving Fryer, former number 1 overall pick out of Nebraska, one of those weird players, by the way, who was better in the second half of his career. Yeah. He actually was really good for the Eagles for a while, was really good for Miami for a while. The joke with Fryer was that he had a problem there was a knife in the knife incident in his kitchen one day, and then he left a game early once and got in a car accident. And 2 different Boston Globe sports writers had the same lead. It was first there was a knife in the kitchen, then it was a fork in the road. And those 2 writers to this day debate on who actually wrote it and who actually stole it from the other guy. I'm not going to name the 2 writers involved, but I think I know. My colleague at the Providence Journal, I believe, was in the right, and the guy at the Boston Globe, I believe, was in the wrong. But anyway, Irving Fryer, what a time to be alive with the 1980s New England Patriots.
I'm just glad you didn't do a Pee Wee Herman story. We didn't need that. What you guys might need, though, are some more start and sit questions, and we got you covered right here on the YouTube channel where you can come in live and talk to us and ask your specific start and sit question Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you're locked in. If you're on the podcast, go to youtube.com/fantasypros. Subscribe, get notified so you don't miss it, and you can get in on the action. Those are wide receivers for Pat and Mr. Scott Pianowski. I'm Chris Welsh. Thank you guys for hanging out with us right here on Fantasy Pros.